to introduce poetry, as you can tell, this looks like the textbook because it is the textbook. And we're just going to read through and go through this first page of the Unit 5, which is about poetry and the text analysis workshop. So we're just going to do this first page. The second page actually is an assignment that I will be having you do on your own. And that is in the end where it says the assessments and the independent practice. So we're just going to dive right into this. So poetry is everywhere, not just within the pages of this book. Song lyrics, greeting card messages, and commercial jingles can all be considered poetry. Believe it or not, probably your favorite artist has poetry in their lyrics, all right? Poetry is everywhere. You might describe some poems as clever, others as inspiring, and others still as sappy. Even so often, though, you might encounter a poem that gets inside your heart and mind, so it has some type of emotional effect on you. How do poems do that? Read on to find out. So, part one, what makes poetry different? Because the biggest thing about poetry is that it's telling a story. It might not be an actual story that you're used to reading that you might see in a book or something like that, but it tells a story. It has a message. So looking down here, it says one difference between poetry and prose has to do with structure or the way the poem looks on the page. So I should have highlighted that whole thing. All right. While short stories and news articles consist of sentences and paragraphs, poems are made up of lines. Another vocab word, a line can be a single word, a sentence, or part of a sentence. In many poems, lines are arranged into groups called stanzas. So lines that are in groups are called stanzas. The way a poet chooses to arrange or put their lines together in stanzas can affect the poem's meaning. So poetry is different from prose in another way. Poetry sounds different than prose, as you'll see when you read the poem below, with all of its rhymes and bouncy rhythms. As you will see, poems have speakers, and the speaker may or may not be a poet. So I want you to think to yourself as you are looking at this poem. What do you think it is about? Okay. Hopefully everyone came up with something about lettuce. You can see a picture of lettuce. So for this poem, I'm just going to read it. What I want you thinking about while I'm reading it is the structure. So the way the poem looks. How many lines does this poem have? And then how many stanzas or groups of lines together does this poem have? All right. So a fine head of lettuce. I'm a fine head of lettuce, a handsome romaine. I haven't a cranium made for a brain. I'm simple and shy. I remain on my own. I'm known in the garden as lettuce alone. So hopefully you could tell I tried to influx my voice as I was reading the poem for you guys, because poetry does read differently than typical text or prose, as the text had mentioned. So when it says to study the poem, you want to think about who the speaker is in this one. So the speaker, hopefully you guys remember what a speaker is, but this is the person that is speaking. All right, who is the storyteller? For this one, the storyteller is a fine head of lettuce. How do you know? I'm a fine head of lettuce. It says I'm a fine head of lettuce, referring to itself. So the speaker is lettuce. Now, lettuce does not actually speak, so obviously, but what this shows you about poetry is that the speaker doesn't necessarily need to be a person. The second question over here says, how many stanzas does the poem have? So if we think about stanzas, stanzas are lines that are arranged into groups. So how many lines do we have here that are arranged into groups? Gonna change my font style for this one. Hopefully you came up with this. All right, a little messy. There's two stanzas. Stanza 1 and stanza 2. I probably should have changed it so it wasn't a giant highlighter, but I hope I get better at this as we continue online learning. So 2 stanzas. How many lines are in each stanza? So remember, I said this was one stanza. This was the second. You count 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the first stanza, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the second stanza. The next question says, what words rhyme in this poem, and is there a pattern to the rhymes? So if you're looking at words that rhyme, two things that jump out to me. Remain and brain in the first stanza. They both rhyme. Remain is in the second line, while brain is in the fourth line. In the second stanza, same exact pattern. Own, last word in the second line, rhymes with alone, which is the last word in the fourth line. So I would say the pattern of this is that lines 2 and 4 rhyme in each stanza. That's the pattern. Last thing down here says, poets like playing with words. What verbal joke do you find in the last line? The joke, which in my opinion isn't very funny, but it's just saying that the lettuce is known in the garden as just being lettuce, and that's it. So hopefully your biggest takeaway of this should be the vocab words. So we have structure, so the way the poem looks on the page. All right, so for this one, you can see the structure of the poem as I zoom in and out like crazy, is that it's arranged in the center of a picture of a piece of lettuce. That's significant to the poem, all right, because the poem is, the speaker is not a piece of lettuce, but a head of lettuce. So saying that the speaker's lettuce and then the picture's also showing a head of lettuce, that's significant. Also, you need to remember a line, single word or sentence or part of a sentence. So like we said, we have 4 lines here for a total of 8 lines for the entire poem. And then lastly, stanzas. Those are when lines are arranged into groups. For this particular poem, we have 2. So you will be doing this model on your own during the assessment and independent practice. Same thing as we did here. I want you to think about these vocab words, structure, lines, stanzas. Also think about the speaker, all right? So the speaker is who is telling the story and who is speaking. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to email me at any point, but good luck.